On October 16, 1946, inside the cold grey walls of Nuremberg prison, the world believed it was about to witness the final decisive act of justice against the architects of the Third Reich. 10 of Nazi Germany's most powerful figures were scheduled to die, to pay the ultimate price for their role in a war that had consumed the globe and for crimes so vast they defied imagination. Among them was a man who stood second only to Hitler in the military hierarchy, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, the chief of the High Command of the Armed Forces. He was the man whose signature had been a death warrant for millions. His execution was meant to be a clean, clinical end, a symbol that the rule of law had prevailed over the rule of terror. But what transpired in the hastily converted gymnasium that morning wasn't clean, nor was it clinical. It was a gruesome, protracted spectacle of incompetence. For Wilhelm Keitel, the end would not come swiftly. Instead, he was subjected to a bungled and agonizing ordeal that saw him struggle at the end of a rope. This is the story of the botched execution of Hitler's highest-ranking military officer. It's a story about a man who embodied blind obedience, the chilling defense he offered, and the dark, disturbing reasons why his final moments became a horrifying spectacle of their own. Why did the final act of justice descend into such a grisly affair? The answer reveals a disturbing truth, not just about one man's death, but about the very nature of vengeance and justice in the shadow of an unprecedented evil. To understand the scene at the gallows, you have to understand the man who stood upon them. Wilhelm Keitel was not a charismatic firebrand or a fanatical ideologue like so many other Nazi leaders. He was a creature of the system, a career military man born in 1882 who had served Germany since 1901. He was a bureaucrat in a field marshal's uniform, a man who wielded immense power not from the battlefield, but from behind a desk. In 1938, when Adolf Hitler restructured the military, he created the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or OKW, the High Command of the Armed Forces, and chose Keitel as its chief. This appointment was met with shock and contempt by many of Keitel's peers in the German officer corps. They saw him as lacking the strategic brilliance and independent will expected of a top commander. They quickly gave him a derisive nickname, La Keitel, a play on the German word Lacay, meaning lackey or yes man. It was a brutally accurate assessment. Keitel's defining characteristic was his unwavering, unquestioning loyalty to Adolf Hitler. While other generals might privately question or even challenge the Führer's increasingly erratic military decisions, Keitel became Hitler's echo. His job wasn't to strategize or advise, but to translate Hitler's will into military orders, no matter how reckless or criminal. He saw himself as the ultimate soldier, bound by an ironclad oath of obedience. But this soldier's honor was a grotesque distortion. His pen became one of the most lethal weapons of the Third Reich. He wasn't a frontline general leading charges, but his signature held the power of life and death on an industrial scale. He was the functionary of genocide, the administrative engine behind mass murder. Wilhelm Keitel was not a bystander. He was the pen that turned Hitler's ideology into policy. In June 1941, it was Keitel who signed the infamous Commissar Order, an instruction that Soviet political officers were to be executed on sight. No trials, no mercy, a direct violation of the laws of war. He went further. Keitel approved decrees that authorized the liquidation of Jews and intellectuals in occupied Poland, giving bureaucratic cover to mass murder. In December 1941, he became the key enforcer of one of the regime's most terrifying directives, Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. Resistance fighters were to be seized in secret, erased from the world, and made to disappear into German camps without explanation. When military lawyers warned that Soviet prisoners of war should be protected under the Geneva Conventions, Keitel dismissed them with contempt. This, he wrote, was not a war of honor. Our job is to suppress a way of life. Perhaps most chilling of all, Keitel endorsed orders declaring that, in the fight against partisans, human life had no value. With his signature, terror against civilians became official policy. This was not blind obedience, This was deliberate enforcement. For years, Wilhelm Keitel was the indispensable cog in Hitler's war machine, the man who ensured the Führer's darkest fantasies didn't remain fantasies. They became orders, they became operations, they became reality. Keitel was not the strategist. He was something far more dangerous. He was the enabler, the obedient executor who translated ideology into action and brutality into bureaucracy. Even as the Reich collapsed and Berlin burned, Keitel did not break away. In the final, desperate days of the war, he stayed at Hitler's side in the Führerbunker, clinging to loyalty long after reason had vanished. When Hitler took his own life, Keitel did not disappear into the chaos. Instead, he followed the remnants of power north, joining the short-lived Flensburg government under Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, a ghost regime ruling over ruins. And then came the final humiliation. It was Keitel whom Dönitz sent to Berlin to sign the unconditional surrender to the Soviet Union. The same man who had helped launch the war now put his name to its total defeat. No speeches, no honor, just surrender. On May 13, 1945, his long career of obedient service came to an abrupt end. Keitel was arrested by the Allies. The loyal lackey was now a prisoner, and for the first time in his life, obedience would no longer protect him. A new court was waiting, and this time, the orders would be read back to him. In the fall of 1945, the world's attention turned to the German city of Nuremberg. There, in the Palace of Justice, the victorious Allied powers convened the International Military Tribunal, an unprecedented court to try the captured Nazi leadership for their crimes. Wilhelm Keitel was among the major war criminals indicted. He faced 4 grave charges: conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning and waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Throughout the trial, the prosecution laid bare the bureaucratic trail of terror that Keitel had overseen. The case against him was built not on battlefield testimony, but on a mountain of paper, on the dozens of criminal orders that bore his signature. The Commissar Order, the Night and Fog Decree, directives authorizing the shooting of civilians without trial. Each document was presented as evidence, each signature a link in the chain of command that led directly from Hitler's will to mass murder. The evidence was overwhelming, showing that Keitel was not merely a messenger, but a willing and essential enforcer. Faced with this damning evidence, Keitel's defense rested on a single notorious argument: the principle of Befehl ist Befehl, an order is an order. He claimed he was merely a soldier following the commands of his supreme commander, Adolf Hitler, to whom he had sworn a sacred oath. In his final statement to the court, he tried to frame his actions as a tragic, soldierly fate, saying, "It is tragic to have to realize that the best I had to give as a soldier, obedience and loyalty, was exploited for purposes which could not be recognized at the time, and that I did not see that there is a limit set for a soldier's performance of his duty. That is my fate." He admitted knowing many of the orders were illegal, but claimed he was powerless to stop them, trapped by his oath and the structure of the Führerprinzip, the leader principle that granted Hitler absolute authority. He portrayed himself as morally troubled but professionally obligated, a tragic figure rather than a malicious one. The tribunal was unmoved. They systematically dismantled his defense. Article 8 of the IMT Charter explicitly stated that following the orders of a superior shall not free a defendant from responsibility. The court ruled that while it could be considered in mitigation of punishment, it offered no immunity, especially for crimes of this magnitude. The evidence showed Keitel was no mere automaton and had at times expanded upon Hitler's orders to make them even more severe. The judgment declared that there is a moral line that no soldier, no matter their rank or oath, can be ordered to cross. On October 1, 1946, the verdicts were read. Wilhelm Keitel was found guilty on all 4 counts. The president of the tribunal pronounced the sentence, death by hanging. In the days that followed, Keitel made one final request, petitioning the Allied Control Council to be executed by a military firing squad, a death he considered more honorable for a field marshal. The request was swiftly denied. The Allies were determined to make a point. Keitel and the others weren't soldiers being executed for losing a war. They were common criminals being punished for mass murder. The gallows would be his fate. The stage was now set in the gymnasium of Nuremberg prison for the final grim act. The execution chamber wasn't a purpose-built facility. It was the prison gymnasium, a small drab room with cracked plaster walls that just days before had been used by American guards for basketball games. Now, it was a place of death. 3 imposing wooden gallows, painted a stark black, stood against one wall. 2 would be used in rotation to speed up the process, with a third kept as a spare. Each scaffold had 13 wooden steps leading to a platform from which a rope was suspended. The atmosphere on the night of October 16, 1946, was thick with tension, witnessed by a small group of Allied officers and international press. The man tasked with the sentences was United States Army Master Sergeant John C. Woods. Woods presented himself as a seasoned professional, boasting to Time magazine of a long career. The reality was very different. Woods had volunteered for the role in 1944 by lying about prior experience as a hangman in Texas and Oklahoma, states that used the electric chair, not hanging. U.S. Army reports suggest Woods had already bungled hangings of American soldiers during the war. He was an executioner defined not by expertise, but by gross incompetence, and in Nuremberg, that incompetence would be on full, horrifying display. Compounding the executioner's lack of skill were flaws in the equipment and method. The U.S. Army used the standard drop or short drop hanging method, not the scientific long drop favored by the British. A long drop was calculated based on a person's weight to ensure the fall was forceful enough to instantly snap the neck, causing a quick death. The American standard drop, by contrast, was far cruder. The fall was too short to break the neck, and was instead designed to cause death by slow strangulation and asphyxiation. But even this brutal method was made worse by the gallows Woods had helped build. The most critical flaw was the size of the trapdoor. It was too small. This meant that as the condemned men fell, they could strike their heads on the edges of the opening on the way down, adding blunt force trauma to the prolonged agony of strangulation. It was a perfect storm, an incompetent executioner, a brutal procedure, and faulty equipment. The Chamber of Justice was, in reality, a chamber of horrors, and Wilhelm Keitel was about to step inside. The executions began shortly after 1 a.m. on October 16, 1946. After Hermann Göring cheated the hangman by taking cyanide in his cell, the first to go was Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's former foreign minister. He was followed by Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the former head of the security police. Wilhelm Keitel was third. At 1:33 a.m., Keitel was led into the chamber. Observers were struck by his composure. At 64 years old, he held his head high and walked with an erect, soldierly bearing, his hands bound behind him. An eyewitness for the International News Service noted his iron-jawed haughtiness. He didn't need the assistance of the guards beside him as he ascended the 13 wooden steps, almost as if he were mounting a reviewing stand. At the top, his name was called for confirmation. "Wilhelm Keitel," he responded in a loud, clear voice. A U.S. Army chaplain offered the last rites, which Keitel accepted briefly. Then, he turned to the witnesses for his final words. There was no apology, no remorse. His voice boomed across the gymnasium in a final, defiant testament to the ideology he served to the end. "I call on God Almighty to have mercy on the German people," he declared. "More than 2 million German soldiers went to their death for the fatherland before me. I follow now my sons, all for Germany." It was a chilling statement. He equated his own execution for mass murder with the deaths of German soldiers in combat, including his 2 sons who died on the Eastern Front, the same front where his criminal orders had been carried out. He presented himself not as a war criminal, but as another patriot dying for his country. After he finished speaking, Master Sergeant Woods placed the black hood over his head and fitted the thick rope noose around his neck. He positioned Keitel over the trapdoor and pulled the lever. What happened next was not a swift end. The short drop failed to snap his neck. Wilhelm Keitel began a slow, agonizing process of strangulation. While some sensationalist reports claimed the ordeal lasted 24 minutes, eyewitness accounts and official timings suggest a still horrific duration. He dropped at 1:20 a.m. and was pronounced dead at 1:33 a.m. For around 13 minutes, he struggled for life at the end of the rope, a brutal, drawn-out death implemented with shocking incompetence. After Keitel's body was finally still, it was cut down and placed behind a canvas curtain, joining the growing line of the executed. The process continued through the early morning, with the hangings of the other Nazis proving just as brutal. Alfred Jodl, Keitel's subordinate, struggled for 18 minutes, while Fritz Saukel took 14 minutes to die. The entire event was a catalogue of horrors that left many witnesses shaken. When it was over, the 10 bodies, along with the corpse of Hermann Göring, were loaded onto army trucks. To prevent their graves from becoming neo-Nazi shrines, their bodies were secretly driven to a crematorium in Munich and incinerated. Their ashes were then unceremoniously scattered into the Isar River, erasing their final physical trace from the world. The botched nature of the executions immediately became controversial. John C. Woods, far from being shamed, seemed proud. He bragged to the press, "I hanged those 10 Nazis, and I am proud of it. A fellow can't afford to have nerves in this business." He claimed he'd never seen an execution go better. The US Army officially denied the hangings were bungled, but eyewitness accounts told a different story. The question of whether the agonizing deaths were justice or simply a cruder form of brutality lingered. Beyond the controversy, the Nuremberg trials and Keitel's case left an indelible mark on international law. The decisive rejection of his superior order's defense established the world-changing Nuremberg principle. It affirmed that individuals are responsible for their actions, even when acting under the orders of a government or superior. It enshrined the concept that there are certain laws of humanity that transcend national laws and military oaths. A soldier is not an automaton. They have a duty to disobey orders that are manifestly criminal. This principle became the bedrock of modern international humanitarian law, influencing the Geneva Conventions and the establishment of the International Criminal Court. Keitel's defense and its failure forced the world to confront the question of individual accountability in the face of state-sponsored evil. The story of Wilhelm Keitel's execution is a grim footnote to the largest conflict in human history. He was a man who rose to the pinnacle of military power not through courage or genius, but through subservience. He was Hitler's enabler, the loyal functionary who meticulously translated a dictator's genocidal rage into the cold, efficient language of military directives. His life was a study in the banality of evil, a demonstration of how ordinary men, by surrendering their moral judgment, can become architects of unimaginable horror. His trial at Nuremberg was a landmark moment, a point in history where the world declared that "I was just following orders" is no defense for crimes against humanity. But the final chapter of his life, his death in that Nuremberg gymnasium, is a more complicated and disturbing tale. The execution was not the clean, swift stroke of justice the world expected. It was a botched, agonizing spectacle, a prolonged ordeal of strangulation born of incompetence and a crude, brutal procedure. In the end, the botched execution of Wilhelm Keitel serves as a powerful, unsettling reflection of the event it was meant to conclude. It was a messy and morally ambiguous end to a regime defined by its own boundless brutality. It leaves us with a stark question that echoes from that cold October morning. In the pursuit of justice for ultimate crimes, how do we prevent the solemn act of judgment from becoming just another form of vengeance? The answer lies buried in the shadows of history, in a gymnasium where the line between the two became horrifically blurred. If you found this exploration into the darker side of history compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel and liking this video, and be sure to check out our other videos for more historical true crime. Thanks for watching.